greatest combat sports mind in the game. Well, certainly in my opinion, Luke Thomas of Morning Combat fame, of many MMA royalties in MMA media. Luke, great to sit down and chat. How are things with you today?
Yeah, they are good. I'm excited about the fights this weekend. That card is loaded in London, and happy to be back with you. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. And as we mentioned there, or as Luke mentioned there, we're going to do a short preview of the upcoming UFC London card. But I think it's important to kind of place this in conjunction with the cards in March, Luke. So first and foremost, fight for fight, which fight card would you say is the stronger?
Ooh, that's a good question. See, that's such a subjective answer. And I would say, well, first of all, that card was crazy. I mean, it was crazy. For me, because I am so high on Tom Aspinall, and this fight is much more difficult for him than the Volkov fight was. That was on the last London card, right? If memory serves.
Correct,
yeah. And obviously he just ran through Volkov. So maybe this one will be the same. Who the hell knows? But for that reason, and there's actually a lot of the same people, right? You've got Molly McCann again. You got Paddy Pimblett. You got Muhammad Mokaev again. You got a lot of the same folks. I would say that for me, maybe that card overall was stronger. No, you know what? No, this one is because it's a much tougher test for Tom. It's a much tougher test for Paddy. You got the Gustaffson factor here. Paul Craig is on this card in a pretty tough, but like there's a lot of really, there was really good bouts on that card previously. This one, I think they upped the ante a little bit for me personally. So I'm going to say this one actually.
Yeah, I think it's also as well a function of what happened on the last one. People are more excited about Molly's fight, probably more excited about Paddy and Tom's fight as well. So it's a little bit, as you mentioned, subjective. But let's talk about the main event first and foremost. Now, the first question I'd like to ask about this Curtis Blaydes, Tom Aspinall fight, Luke, is would you have a clear sense if I told you where the fight takes place, of who would have the advantage? And what I mean by that is if the fight primarily takes place on the feet, would you see Aspinall having the clear advantage to win, or would you, or conversely, if it was on the ground, would you give Blaydes the advantage there?
Probably. I think that's probably the right answer. I the thing about Tom is that he keeps finding ways to surprise me about how good he is, and I'm pretty high on him. It's not like I don't think he's good. I am so excited for this fight because I think he's probably one of the most exciting prospects, or now contenders, really, in all of MMA, independent of weight class. But dude, Curtis Blaydes is it's a really, really, really tough fight, especially this, relatively speaking, early in his UFC run for Tom Aspinall. So to answer the question more appropriately, on the feet, well, I'll say this, like, for example, you go to the Curtis Blaydes fight against Chris Dawkins. He didn't really go for one takedown, I don't think, and still knocked him out viciously, basically with one shot. So it's hardly like I think it's a walk in the park for Tom. But yes, I do. Tom's got a lot of athletic gifts and has a little bit more of that bouncy in and out, springy kind of motion to his game overall, and obviously in the striking department in particular. And I think that will serve him well. I'll just say this though, and I don't think it's not very controversial, and I hope folks accept it on your side of the pond there. If Curtis Blaydes is having success in the takedown department, now Tom Aspinall has a 100% takedown defense rate, which is obviously extraordinary, but he has not faced a takedown threat the way that Curtis Blaydes is a takedown threat. So if he finds himself continuously underneath Curtis, I think that's a big problem. I will be curious to see to what extent, A, he can nullify that, or B, to what extent he tries to turn the tables and either get on top or initiate some kind of grappling exchange that puts it in his favor. But yeah, I don't think it's so simple to say that as long as it's on the feet, Tom can't lose. I don't think that's accurate. But does he have an advantage on the feet? Yes, I do think he does.
Tom, to me, and I want to get your opinion on this, but Tom, to me, has an Alexander Volkanovski aspect to him, where when I watch Tom, I know he's doing something fantastic, but I can't quite pinpoint what it is. So I guess on this 5-fight run where we've seen 5 finishes and him only leave the first round once, what is kind of Tom's USP? What is the thing that Tom does for you that is kind of so special and makes him such a highly touted prospect in your eyes?
Right. When he first came around and he was doing what he was doing, like when he was beating the Arlovskis and stuff, it wasn't exactly like you could, like, for example, like the one knock on on Volkanovski is that It took him several rounds to put away TKZ, and the Ortega fight went very long, and obviously the Holloway fights, all of them went the distance and so forth. So in that sense, you actually get a lot of tape on him. Right? You get a lot of tape. How does he react in the fourth round? What's his gas tank like in the third? What is his decision-making like in the fifth? Even in the Aldo fight was only 3 rounds, but it went the full distance. And so you actually get you can be confused by it, but now you're beginning to get a much clearer sense. One of the things that Tom is doing, he's just blowing motherfuckers out of the water. So there's you're like, what is he going to do against Arlovsky? He was just quicker. He had better boxing. He has the glimpses that he's shown you don't have the same library at this point that you have on Volkanovski. But what he has, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, first of all, it's just the accumulative success and the ease with which it has come. That is somewhat shocking by itself. Beyond that, though, I would say he is the thing that does stand out. He's obviously quite athletic, right? He's very athletic. He uses his athleticism well. The other one is he just makes really smart decisions, both in the general sense, like how do I want to approach a fight against Volkov? I'm not really going to fuck around with this guy. It's funny. He makes decisions, and he seems to me he game plans in ways that championship level fighters do. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of times to talk to guys, it's how are you approaching this? And it's I'm going to make a read here and there, and I look out for this, look out for that. Tom seems to me, I don't know what his process is, but he seems to have a clear sense of, okay, what is that guy good at? And what are the conditions under which he is good at them? Right? Let's take all that away. Let's just take it away. And that could be on the feet. It could be, it's not just standing or ground. It's a lot of different ways in which you can do that. He seems to find that answer quickly and then make use of it quickly. It's just a high level decision-making from him. I don't know the full totality of his game. What is Tom Aspinall like with his gas tank in the fourth round? Don't know. Don't really know the answer to that. And that's an important question, by the way, which Blaydes is probably well suited to test. So we're going to find out a lot more about him probably in a fight like this. But if I had to answer in the more immediate sense, it's the athleticism, and it's just the clear decision-making, the preparedness he has for his opponents, and then just a very calm execution. These are all the trademarks of either a veteran fighter or a talented fighter. Well, he's not a veteran fighter, so it kind of narrows it down. Yeah.
If we turn the conversation to his opponent, Curtis Blaydes, I would like to get your thoughts on something that I've kind of analysed or kind of thought about is you can quite clearly separate his UFC run into 3 distinct categories: crushing defeats, i.e. Ngannou and Lewis; crushing victories, i.e. Dorcas, Dos Santos and the like; and kind of lackluster wins with the likes of Jairzinho Rosenstrike, the likes of the Alexander Volkov fight where he showed a little bit of deficiencies in his gas tank. So as a kind of quasi-contender, where do you feel Curtis Blaydes is, and what would the victory over Aspinall do for him?
Yeah. So I actually thought they were not going to match up Tom with Curtis Blaydes. I thought after what had happened with Gane in the Francis Ngannou fight that they might match up Gane with Blaydes, because the big question there was, of course, his wrestling abilities. And it didn't go that way. So here we are, this one. For me, dude, I think Curtis Blaydes is about the toughest test you're going to get in this division from someone who's not a champion, right? So let me just be very clear about this for any of your audience. If Tom Aspinall goes in there and not just win, first of all, just winning would be extremely impressive. But if he goes in there and I don't know if you guys use this sort of parlance on your side of the world, but if he goes in there and stunts on him, just looks shining the whole time, that is, I mean, put that fucker in a title shot immediately. Like you're making out to be, some of those losses. I don't in any way challenge the characterization of them, but I view it slightly differently. I view it as he had 2 shots against Francis, and Francis's power was basically just too overwhelming. Okay, fair enough. And then the Derek Lewis fight, that was just a nice shot from Derek Lewis, take nothing from him. But if they matched up 10 times, I'm still probably picking Blaydes the majority of those times. And you're right, he had some lackluster ones, like for example against Volkov. But to me, the big part is he's very good athlete. He's got very good wrestling. Remember, he was a sparring partner for Stipe Miocic back in the day. And he has bumped up to that highest level and found himself, for different reasons at different times, a little bit wanting along the way. But what you have noticed is yes, the Volkov fight was kind of a retreat back to relying on wrestling. But I think in general, what you have seen, and again, I referenced the Dawkins fight, it's more in keeping with that. He has worked steadily on his overall improvement. This is why I say, if the fight is standing, I do favor Aspinall very clearly. But I don't think that by itself, that's like a guaranteed path to victory, because hello, this guy, Curtis Blaydes, has worked on a lot of things, including for example, you go to the Dawkins fight. How did he set it up? He was switching stances, moving over to his right. He got Dawkins to fade into it, and then hit him with a right hand cleanly. And by the way, with better mechanics and shorter mechanics as well. Dude, there's a lot of really good skills that go into making something like that happen. So to me, what the story of Curtis Blaydes is that basically, the Derek Lewis fight notwithstanding, but the basic narrative for me is that he has gone and tasted the highest level and just couldn't quite get it done. So what he's done is he's worked on his game and faced a lot of high level guys in the interim. And for the most part, he beats all those guys. Yeah. So where is Tom Aspinall? Is he the guy that can give a guy like this problems, or is he all the other guys? Curtis Blaydes is about the best test for you to find out in the heavyweight division. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Let's talk a little bit about co-main event now. Unfortunately, the Brit Darren Tillers had to pull out, but we've now got Jack Hermansson stepping in against Chris Curtis on late notice. I guess what I would like to frame the conversation around this fight is, what does a win tell us in either direction? I.e., if Jack beats Chris, what's the takeaway? And if Chris beats Jack, what is the takeaway for you?
Yeah, I know this has to be tough for you, right? The Liverpool guy who's out, and it was a big fight for him too, and
very
relatively. Say again.
A very tough fight too, I think I might add.
Yeah. For sure. It's a tough fight. It was, I should say, a tough fight in either direction. This one's no different, but for different reasons. Okay. So it'd be funny, right? Like if Curtis goes in there and wins, I think it would probably be a bad sign for Jack that a guy on short notice, not that Curtis is some chump, and I'm going to make a point about that in just a second. He's not, but for a short notice opponent who's also going to be fighting, relatively speaking, a lot like Till, in the sense that it's probably going to be mostly a striking affair. You're probably going to have an opponent who doesn't want to go with you to the ground, right? He didn't go from striker to, black belt world champion. Yeah. That's not what he got. He went from a sort of a striking based guy to a guy who is majority strike. I mean, look, the guy who just fought Rodolfo Vieira and didn't want any part of the ground. Of course, it's Rodolfo, but you get the idea. Like that's kind of way of fighting. So I would say if Jack loses to a guy on short notice, as talented as Chris is, that's kind of a bad sign. There are probably real questions about what kind of contender he would be. He might fall out of the top 10. I'm not sure exactly where he's ranked as we speak, but it would be a bit of a setback. Yeah. If he wins, that's the kind of the trouble that Jack is in, because if you lose, you lose a lot. If you win, you don't get as much. I'll say this. I think if Jack goes in there and does what Jack does, which is like, unrelenting takedown pressure for the most part, when he's doing the kinds of things that he wants to do, it would just sort of tell you that he's still relevant, but he doesn't get it's not a big win for him in that sense. On the other side, that's what I mean with Chris Curtis coming in on short notice. Yes, he had a recent fight, but coming on short notice, traveling internationally, time zone change, all that nonsense. For him to beat a guy as good as Jack Hermansson, first of all, it wouldn't just be like a difficult assignment by virtue of everything else I mentioned, but also it'd be probably his best win to date, his most high-level guy he's ever beaten. I think that's probably pretty fair. And then when you really think about it, for a guy that got that I always remind people this, Chris Curtis didn't just win on Contender Series. He stopped a guy with like an exotic kick, I believe. Like he actually finished the dude off with strikes, and then still didn't get a deal and was going to retire from the sport, kind of like ho-hummed his way through PFL, and has looked absolutely reborn. For a guy like that to persevere and to beat someone as good as Jack Hermansson, your very best fighter ever, on your resume under less than ideal circumstances, after getting bounced off the Contender Series, dude, and then retiring, that is an insane turnaround. It would instantly elevate his brand to a level which he has never, ever, ever, ever seen it. And I don't think a loss hurts him all that much. There's lots of ways Jack is maybe just better on the ground and more prepared and could easily win this. So really, really a high risk, low reward fight for Jack, a high reward, fairly low risk fight for Chris Curtis.
I'd like to move the conversation on to Paddy now, but I'd just like to reference four debuting fights. If he were to get a 4-fight win streak of Phil Hawes, Brendan Allen, Rodolfo Vieira and Jack Hermansson, that is a very, very strong 4-fight win streak to start your UFC career. Now, let's talk about the man from Liverpool, the man who virtually everybody wants to talk about these days, Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. First and foremost, Luke, what I'd like to ask you is, Paddy has a very much quite strange vocabulary. He uses a lot of strange phrasing. And what I'd like to know is despite him being so popular in the US, do you think the US fans actually know what everything that Paddy is saying when he's going on these long tirades and making all these audacious claims in these interviews and such?
I think a lot of stuff gets lost, if I could be honest with you. I think a lot of it gets lost, but it doesn't matter because enough of it sticks, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, what they really want, like obviously we all speak the same language in very different ways, but we do speak the same language. And so you go and you look at someone like Jose Aldo, right? So he's always been somewhat limited with the fan base, even during his championship reign, because he didn't speak English. He only spoke Portuguese, but it was a little bit more than that, right? Like he was just unless you really spoke Portuguese, it was hard to detect any personality at all, and again, maybe the Brazilian folks would have a very different sense of things, but from an English speaker who doesn't know any Portuguese, it just felt like he was giving very ho-hum answers all the time and was just kind of checked out. And Paddy's the opposite, right? So, yes, there's some stuff that's lost. And, obviously I know Liverpool, even within England, has its own little vocabulary and words and stuff like that. But, dude, he's got a certain verve. He's got a certain command. He's got a certain energy. He's obviously got a lot of youth on his side. That is just naturally appealing for a lot of folks. And then, the vast majority of the English does get through. And so I think that's what people are responding to. It's like, yes, there's this. And also, like, we always like seeing that next big push coming over the hill. I remember when Conor was getting pushed, it was like, oh, there's this double champ from Cage Warriors, and there was all this excitement about him. Like, Paddy is surfing a similar kind of wave. I don't mean the accomplishments are the same, but I mean from the American standpoint of what's coming over from the sort of Irish UK side of things, he's got a little bit of that same kind of wave he's riding. And then every dude, he does media. He does a lot of media. He does a lot of media well. Like, there's just a lot of reasons why you can clearly see why the American fan base and North American fan base, the Canadians too, have so strongly gravitated to a guy like that. It's not an accident at all.
He's talked, I presume you know this, but I know he's talked in a lot of interviews about rejecting a UFC contract at the age of 21 and then again at 23 and then accepting one at 26. So as we see him now going into his third UFC fight, how kind of developed is his skill set relative to where he is in his UFC career for you?
So, by the way, which I think was the right call, and I remember him years ago, and I don't know what year it was, but I remember him when he was in Cage Warriors saying stuff like, I don't need to go to the UFC. I can stay in Cage Warriors. And a lot of folks like giving him a side eye. I think he actually played it right. I think he totally played it right. You can get high quality opposition in Cage Warriors. You can build a name for yourself, and you can get like the 5-round experiences. There's a lot you can get out of sticking around. And some of these guys, they're destitute financially, so they take a fight, they're 6-0 or something, and then they jump to the UFC, and it's like, dude, once you go, man, there's not a lot of going back. Like, they can. I do believe that the UFC has match made Paddy in a way that has been, let's say, comfortable for him. But that people accused it again. It was very different, but they accused McGregor of like, oh, the UFC is not feeding him wrestlers. But what they really misunderstood about that argument was, it was like, okay, that was probably true. Like, they could have given him Edgar earlier in his rise, and they didn't. And that does seem like an intentional call. But the point was that it's like, dude, if you eventually fight the guys that this guy's going to fight at that level, once you hit that top 5, they're not going to go to top 5 and then out of the top 15. You're going to have to fight those guys once you get there anyway. Like, the order could matter, of course, but like, you can get a little bit of a help from the matchmaker. That is true, but you can't get infinite help from them. It's a very short window you get help. So do I think he's gotten help? Yes, of course I do. I don't think he's fought guys that were necessarily all that great. But this is a big difference, dude. Jordan Leavitt is good. Like, to me, this might be one of Paddy's better wins. Like, you're asking me where he is in his development. I'll say this. I'll break it up into 2 parts. I think that his ground game is very good. And I think that his back takes are good. I think his back control is good. I think his ability to hunt for the back is good. I also know that he trains out here at Studio 540 with Justin Flores, who was, of course, a coach to Ronda Rousey. Dude, Justin Flores is a fucking animal of a coach. And I see the stuff that they put, it's obviously what you put on social media, but I see it, dude. He's getting solid instruction. Like, dude, on that level, he's ready to rock. He's good to go. It's the striking defense to me that gives me some problems. He does get hit a lot. The numbers speak to that. I've got him right here. Strikes absorbed per minute, 3.89. For a guy who has only fought less than 2 rounds total, that's high. That's high. That's really high. So, and you've seen it. You've seen him get rocked several times, kind of running into things a little bit and kind of over fighting, not brawling exactly, but being so aggressive in ways that might aid his grappling, but hinder some other things. So what I'm hoping to see from him here is, I do think eventually, like, both of these guys are grapplers, so I am fairly confident it's going to end up that way. And by the way, Jordan Leavitt's a very good grappler. Like, he might be able to match Paddy on that level. But I do think Paddy is very UFC ready on that level. To answer the question, it's the striking defense that gives me some pause. I think he really, really needs to clean that up if he wants to go to the places where the rest of his game might be ready to take him.
Your co-host, Brian Campbell, often talks about Ryan Garcia and says that eventually, I think he used the phrase on Monday, he's going to get, and I quote, splattered eventually. Do you see a similar thing happening with Paddy when you're talking about striking defense, that eventually the fan appeal and the media push is going to push him into a matchup in which that could leave him face down on the canvas?
Well, you do have to have a fair... But, you know, it's funny. Boxing is all striking, right? There's no wrestling. But at the same time, you know, it's something that's hard to appreciate. And I say this all the time, and folks see highlights on Instagram and don't think this is true. But if you really watch boxing round over round over round over round, it's actually really hard to land cleanly on a high level guy in boxing. It doesn't happen. Yes, it happens in fights, but usually doesn't happen all that routinely, except at the very end, or if there's a huge mismatch or something like that. But even Ryan Garcia, it took him 4 rounds before he could deliver that liver shot to Fortuna in his last fight. And so, you know, that's a fair amount of time that has to expire before you really see somebody get hit clean in that way. So for Ryan to get splattered, you know, it would mean that something has gone really, really wrong. In the UFC, like, you know, with elbows and knees and everything else, like, it's not like, dude, high level guys get splattered a lot. I think the issue for me with Paddy is this. I'll say it this way. If he doesn't really defensively clean up his striking and some of the decision makings about distance closure, when to press the gas, when to press the brakes, those kinds of things, yeah, he will. I mean, but dude, that's the reality for everybody. Connor splattered Jose Aldo. Look at that shit. You know what I mean? Because what did he do? He ran into a punch. You can't fuck around at this part of the game for very long without dire consequences coming your way. And so while that's a present concern for literally everyone, it's not something that, like, oh, because Paddy is this or that, he's uniquely set up for it. I think if he continues to work on his development, then, you know, then these are things he can put off. But I'll say this, if he brings in the striking defense, maybe not so much in this fight, it's all who's to say, but if he brings in the striking defense that he brought in his last 2 contests forward, it's bad things will happen. This is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, dude. You just can't play around like that.
Yeah, of course. Now, we've got a lot of tantalizing other matchups. We haven't got the time to discuss them all in the same detail. Obviously, we've got Alexander Gustaffson's return, who, by the way, I'd just like to make a note, because I saw a episode of Morning Combat a couple of weeks ago where you and Brian were debating who's the greatest fighter to never win a UFC title. And Alexander Gustafsson's name never came up. I believe Alexander Gustaffson is the best fighter to never win a UFC title. I'll just put it out there. Let you think about that. But okay, but we've got a lot of more tantalizing matchups. Paul Craig versus Volkan Ozdemir, plus the Molly McCann's return after the knockout of the year, perhaps, and a lot of great matches on the undercard. So give me the matchup that you're most excited to see on the rest of this UFC London card.
Ooh, let me pull up the card here because I don't want to get this one wrong. So what I'm going to say, so people were asking me, oh, am I high on the Gustaffson fight? I'll say that I'm excited he's back at light heavyweight. I do think that is appropriate. The Verdum thing just was a miss. It didn't work. So there's that. For me, though, and there's some good ones, the biggest prospect would obviously on the prelim card would be Muhammad Mokaev and then the Charles Johnson fight, but that's not going to be my answer. My answer is going to be Paul Craig and Ozdemir. Although that's on the main card, isn't it? You're asking about the prelims specifically?
Any fight, or indeed a fighter that you're excited to see.
Because, you know, it's amazing, dude. Paul Craig is amazing. He's his guy. He's just got the most unusual game for a 205-pound fighter I maybe have ever seen, honestly. Listen, Ozdemir is going to light him up on the feet. I mean, I would be very surprised if Craig is just, you know, battering him and backing him up. Like, Ozdemir has fought really tough guys. He's done really well against very tough guys. He's got some great wins, fast hands, you know, powerful, big dude. Like, there's no good reason Paul Craig should win this one, but you could say that about a lot of guys Paul Craig has fought, and he finds ways to get it done. I will say that for that reason, I am curious to see what the limits are of Paul Craig's game and the way in which he applies it, because Oezdemir is a guy on paper who is, he's had his ups, he's had his downs. He is by no means a perfect fighter with a perfect record, far from it, but he's got the right kind of athleticism, backing, training, veteran experience to not make the kinds of poor decisions some of the guys who have fought Craig have made. So what does Craig do to adjust that situation? How does he come around that if he can? I am very, very curious to see how that goes. The McCann fight is interesting, but she should beat Hannah Goldie. She should. So I'm not as, that one is not as,
that's more of a one-sided excitement.
The thing is this, like Oezdemir versus Craig could actually end up being more one-sided.
Yeah.
But because the thing is this, Paul Craig pulls rabbits out of his hat in ways that you can only see a magician do. I want to see if he's got a little more magic on Saturday, I guess.
Paul Craig, I think, is MMA's John Wick. You just don't piss him off. Otherwise, he comes to vengeance, essentially.
No one mess with his dog.
Effectively. But I'd also like to shout out Mark Diakese, who's back after a good win in January. Mark Diakese, Luke, was the first UFC fighter I ever met. And what a guy, by the way, a very chilled, relaxed dude. So shout out to Mark. Hopefully you can get
also, if I may, back in the UFC, I'm not sure. I think this might be his second fight back, or I'm not. I have to go back and look. But Nicholas Dalby. Nicholas Dalby had a blood and guts fight against Darren Till right back in the day. And he is opening this card, but he had a long journey. I think he had some personal problems and he worked through them. Here he is back on the big stage. Again, I'm not sure this is the fight back or it's the second one or whatever, but good to see him on this card as well.
Just for clarification, it's the second fight back. He got the split decision over Daniel Rodriguez, which most of us got for Rodriguez.
That's it. Yep.
But very quickly before you go, Luke, I'd like to just very quickly touch on UFC 278. Reason being is we've got Leon Edwards, the Brit, in the world title fight against Kamaru Usman. Now, I did a little bit of digging because I know you're a stats guy. I know you like stats. In Leon Edwards' UFC run, he's got a 27% finish rate in the UFC. So we are likely to assume if he's going to win this fight, it comes down to winning 3 rounds out of 5 against Kamaru Usman. How likely is that? And how, if you were game planning for Edwards' skill set against Usman, how would you do it?
It is unlikely, I think. We're talking about Kamaru Usman. It's either him or Volkanovski as the best fighter in the game. So that's what we're talking about, that Edwards has to fight. That is not easy. It's funny. Actually, the other day I went back and I rewatched their first fight. Edwards fought pretty well in that one. The big takeaway was that, like, he could stuff some of the takedowns. He could land on Kamaru. He could do a lot. There was a lot he was able to do. The problem was at every round, and especially you saw this in the third, Kamaru's physicality just began to take over a little bit. That was the big takeaway for me. I think for Edwards to win, he not only has to stuff the takedown, he has to avoid physical contact, right? What I mean by that is, obviously, you have to win by exerting physical control or damage. But what I mean is, if he gets pressed up against the fence, he has to separate. If there's a takedown, he has to immediately get to his feet, and not just get to his feet. Like, there has to be separation. This fight is winnable. I'll say this. This fight is winnable for Leon Edwards at distance. If Kamaru is accommodating him in the way that he accommodated, like, Colby, which I grant is a very different threat, but if you get a more striking-based Kamaru, which we've gotten a lot more of recently, that is winnable for Leon. Leon is extremely talented. One of the best one of the best welterweights in the world. Super, super well-rounded. Can do everything very well. I don't think he can win a man. Actually, let's just put it this way. I don't think he can win a horsepower contest with Kamaru over 25 minutes. That's what I don't think he can do. And of course, in the first fight, that was actually kind of how he lost. It wasn't like he was like, oh, he has a shit ground game. Far from it. Or he couldn't handle himself on the feet. Far from it. But Kamaru, he hangs on you like humidity. You know what I mean? And it's really hard to get that. Once that gets in motion, that was the other part too, right? The takedown's a little bit harder to come by in the first round. By the third round, they were coming a lot easier. That process has to be stopped. If you can't stop that process, I don't like his chances. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more, to be honest. And it's one thing I'd say, look, we just like to end. It's a fantastic time for us as British fans, notably with this card. We've got Brendan Loughnane in the semi-final of the PFL. We've got MVP fighting Mike Perry on the same night. So thank you all. Thank you for your time, and thank you for helping to break down some of these fantastic fights. And I'd just like to say personally, thank you for all the support and guidance you've given me. And it really does mean a lot.
Well, keep going. And I got to say, I remember covering MMA in the days when all we had from the British side of things, we had Ian the Machine. Well, Ian the Machine Freeman was headlining over there against Frank Mir, but it was it Royal Albert Hall they were fighting in back in the day when Matt Hughes was slamming Carlos Newton, and there was hardly any British fighters. You had Lightning Lee Murray, and there was Cage Rage and stuff like that. But there just was, it was a trickle. There wasn't a whole lot. Now, like, it feels like the spigot has been turned on, and there's just talent pouring out of England, and the fan base in England might be the best combat sports fan base in the world. So it's a very good thing to see. And I got to tell you, on this side of the equation, we are very happy to see that market develop. So I'm excited.
Yeah. And I've got one more prospect before you go, just a very quick name. We talked about Jordan Vucenic last time, and I remember sending you a video where he choked out James Hendon to defend his Cage Warriors title. I've got another one for you. Dominic Wooden, the Cage Warriors bantamweight champion, Black Panther.
Okay.
Keep an eye out on him. He is endorsed by middleweight champion Israel Adesanya. They are very good friends.
Okay, very good. That's all I needed to hear. I will be on the lookout.
Perfect. Luke, before we finish, how can people find you on social media, and any things you'd like to shout out? The floor is yours for the last word.
Yeah, I have the show Morning Combat. Combat is spelled with a K. You can check that out. And Twitter, just at L Thomas News, and you can find everything I do from there. Is probably the best place to do it. So I appreciate everyone who watches, and that's it.
Make sure to subscribe to the LowKick MMA YouTube channel for all the latest news, event previews, and interviews with some of the biggest stars in MMA.